I was never the kind of brother who only showed up when it was convenient. In fact, if someone went back in time and asked which of us was the most stubborn, I'd say without thinking, her. My sister was always made of decisiveness, one of those people who, when they choose something, let the rest of the world adjust. And me, I was the one who adjusted. For years, I was the guy who solved what nobody else wanted to solve. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I just did it. Because that's what family was, right? And it's funny how certain memories are kept as if they were photographs. I can see us as children sharing the same table, the same old television, the same silences. I can hear her laughing when she thought nobody was paying attention. And I can feel, I still can, that natural sense of protection, as if it were my obligation not to let anything get too close to her. But there are things you only understand later. Back then, I thought my sister and I were the indestructible type. The type that could fight, drift apart a little, slam the door, and still come back. Because blood is thicker than water, right? But I wasn't prepared for the day I discovered that blood can also close the door. And that day arrived in the most cowardly way possible, without a fight, without an explanation, without a conversation. Just absence. Her wedding was approaching. It was everyone's topic of conversation. Relatives commented. My mother was always on her cell phone. My father put on that I don't care act, but I could see he did care. And me? I was in the middle, as I always have been. I wasn't the most enthusiastic about weddings. Not because I was bitter, but because I always saw what comes after. Bills, routine, stress, difficult choices. But it was my sister's wedding. The most important day of her life. At least, that's what everyone kept saying. And I, even with my reservations, wanted to be there. Not just out of formality. I wanted to be there because somehow I felt it was the closing of a cycle. One of those scenes you keep to remember when you get older. I even imagined what it would be like. I saw myself adjusting my tie awkwardly. I saw myself nervous for no reason. I saw myself sitting on the bench looking ahead, waiting. I saw myself smiling when she entered. And the most ridiculous thing is that I hadn't even realized that nobody had spoken to me about the invitation. I hadn't seen anything. No pretty paper, no formal message, nothing. At first I thought, okay, it must be because she's busy. She'll arrive. But the days went by, and the conversation only grew. My mother talked about details, flowers, table, party favors. Cousins commented on clothes, about the hotel, about the party. And I still had nothing. Until one Sunday at lunch, someone uttered a simple phrase. Too simple, as if it were normal. My aunt, one of those who speak without filtering, asked, "And you? Who are you going with?" I didn't understand at first. With whom what? She laughed. To the wedding, of course. And I felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under the table. I tried to answer automatically. I tried to keep a normal face. I'll go. I'll see. I said that, but inside, I felt something difficult to explain. You know when you realize you're late for something and you start desperately looking for the clock? Except it wasn't a clock there. It was dignity. I looked at my mother as if seeking confirmation, and she avoided my gaze. And I understood. I understood without a word. Her silence was the first response, and it was the worst. After lunch, I stood at the sink washing a glass that was already clean, just to keep my hands busy. My heart pounded in my chest as if I had been running. I went to my mother later. Why didn't anyone talk to me about marriage? She took a deep breath, and that breath, it was like a warning. Your father and I didn't want to worry you. I laughed. A short, humorless laugh. Worry about what, Mom? She stood still, and then she said softly, as if she were committing a crime, she asked me not to include you. When my mother said that, I didn't hear it properly. I heard it, but I didn't process it. You know when a word enters your ear but doesn't make sense in your brain? That's what it was like. What do you mean, Not include me. My mother tried to justify it with broken sentences. It's a phase. She's stressed, you know how she is. Her fiancé, too. But it didn't matter because the truth was simple. My sister chose, and her choice was to erase me. I went to my room and closed the door, not out of anger, out of shame, because I could even understand anger. Anger has a logic. Someone does something, you react, you argue. But that wasn't anger. It was coldness. And coldness has a different weight. It says, you're not important enough to even be confronted. I picked up my phone and opened our conversation. The last message was mine from days ago. Is everything all right? Do you need help with something? She had seen it and didn't reply. I stared at the screen for too long. My finger swiped over her name. I thought about calling. I thought about sending an audio message. I thought about going to her house and demanding an explanation. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Maybe pride, maybe fear. Because the scariest part wasn't that she had excluded me. It was hearing from her own mouth clearly what the silence was already screaming. I don't want you there. And at that moment, sitting on the edge of the bed, I realized I was about to experience one of the most childish and devastating pains that exist, being left out by someone you would never leave out. I looked at my phone again and wrote, I heard about the wedding. Nothing reached me. Was it a mistake, or was it your choice? I held my finger on the send button for a few seconds, and I sent it. The message went through. Delivered. And then, nothing. No hi. No, I'll talk to you later. No, it's not quite like that. Just nothing. And it was at that moment that I understood that this wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a declaration, and I had just been thrown out of her life, without even knowing when it started. And I swear, I tried to remember every conversation, every look, every detail of the last few months, looking for a reason, a mistake of mine, an error, anything that would explain it. But the only thing I could hear inside my head was a phrase I never thought I'd say about my own sister. She did it on purpose. And that's where the story truly begins. Not at the altar, not at the party, but in the silence, in the emptiness, in the question that wouldn't let me breathe. What did I do? To be erased. After the message went unanswered, I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, but because my mind wouldn't shut off. It was as if someone had opened an old drawer inside me and scattered everything on the floor. Memories, scenes, voices, all mixed together. I kept trying to understand at what point we stopped being us. Because the truth is, for a long time, I was more than a brother. I was a witness. I saw my sister fall and get back up more times than she can imagine. I saw up close the versions of her that no one else knew. And maybe that's why it hurt so much. Because it wasn't just about not going to a wedding. It was about being erased from a story I helped build. I remembered the first time she cried in my room, sitting on the floor, saying the world seemed too big for her. I didn't say anything that night. I just sat beside her and stayed there. I remembered when she made wrong decisions, the kind you only make when you're young and believe nothing has consequences. And I was the first to arrive when everything went wrong. Not to judge, never to say, I told you so. I've always been the type of person who prefers to carry the weight in silence, rather than burden someone I love. And now I was being treated like an inconvenient stranger. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's her fiancé. Maybe it's pressure. Maybe she thinks I wouldn't approve. But none of those hypotheses held true. Because if there was anyone who always respected her choices, that person was me, even when I disagreed, even when I suffered inside. I never tried to control my sister's life. I just was there. And it's curious how the absence of an explanation creates a different kind of pain. When someone hurts you and explains, you have something to fight with. You can disagree, yell, argue, defend yourself. But when there's no explanation, you fight with yourself. I started revisiting old conversations, messages, audios. I read simple things as if they were clues to an unsolved crime. A shorter answer, an emoji that used to exist and then disappeared. A "we'll talk later" that never turned into a conversation. Small things, but when you're hurt, everything becomes a sign. I wondered if I had been too harsh in some advice, if I had said something hurtful, if some comment of mine had been interpreted as criticism. And the more I thought, the more I realized I was trying to take on a guilt that wasn't mine. Because excluding someone isn't an accident. Excluding is a conscious choice, and that choice hadn't been made impulsively. It had been thought out, sustained, and maintained. I tried to remember the last time we sat down for a real conversation, not about practical matters, but those conversations that last until the early hours of the morning. It had been a long time, maybe too long, and that's when an idea began to form, silently, unsettlingly. Maybe I was too important, and that at some point started to bother me. Because when someone knows you deeply, that person sees your weaknesses, and some people prefer to distance themselves from those who remind them who they really are. This idea hit me like a slow punch. It wasn't about hate, nor about direct rejection. It was about control. Maybe she wanted a new chapter in her life where I wasn't there. The brother who knows too much. The brother who remembers too much. The brother who isn't easily impressed. And if that was it, then there was nothing I could do. Why don't you argue with the person who decided to rewrite you outside of your own story? I got out of bed that morning and went to the window. The street was silent, and I thought about how many times I'd been there, awake, worried about her. How many times I'd answered calls late at night. How many times I'd defended her when she wasn't around. How many times I'd swallowed words to preserve the peace. And now, at the moment, she declared eternal love before everyone. I wasn't even worthy of sitting on a bench in silence. This wasn't just exclusion. It was a clear message. You belong to the past. And this realization made something change inside me. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and clarity, because for the first time, I began to accept a hard truth. Maybe I loved my sister more than she loved me as a brother, and that hurts in a way that's hard to explain properly. It's not physical pain, it's not screaming pain. It's a heavy pain, a tiring pain, a pain that makes you wonder if it's always been like this, and you just didn't want to see it. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling. The phone was still there, silent, and at that moment I did something I never thought I would do. I started to prepare myself emotionally for the wedding to happen without me, without confrontation, without goodbye, as if I had never been a part of it. And as I accepted this, a question began to echo, louder than any other. If I wasn't important enough for the most important day of her life, then what had I really been to her all these years? After that night, I tried to go on with my life as if nothing had changed. Not because I was okay, but because sometimes pretending everything is normal is the only way to keep breathing. I would wake up, do my things, answer work messages, but there was always a part of my mind occupied with the same question. Will she reply? I looked at my phone more times than I admit, not out of childish anxiety, but because there was a stubborn hope inside me, that ridiculous hope that says, maybe today. But the days passed, and the silence remained intact. That's when I decided to try again. Not dramatically, not with demands. I sent something simple, almost too neutral for someone hurt. If I did something that bothered you, tell me. We can talk. I sent it, and I waited. The message was delivered, seen, and nothing. That red receipt was worse than any curt reply could have been. Because there was no doubt she read it, she understood, she chose not to respond. And it was at that moment that I realized there wasn't an open conflict between us. What existed was a wall. An invisible, silent, and insurmountable wall. There was no shouting from the other side. There was no argument. Just a cold wall between two people who grew up together. I tried a third way. People. Mother, cousin, someone who was closer to her. Nothing direct, nothing accusatory. Just loose questions. Did she say anything? Is everything all right? Did I do something wrong? The answers always came halfway. She's very busy. Marriage is stressful. Then you two can talk. Later. That word started to bother me, because later became a comfortable excuse to avoid dealing with the present. And the present was simple and cruel. I wasn't part of the plans. The preparations progressed. I saw photos of fittings, group messages that I wasn't in, details being decided without me. It was like watching the exclusion itself in slow motion. And the most painful thing is that nobody seemed to find it strange. It was as if somehow my disappearance had been normalized. I started to feel ashamed. Ashamed of being the only brother who wouldn't be there. Ashamed of answering questions. Ashamed of seeming like that problematic relative that nobody talks about out loud. And that ate me up inside. Because I always made a point of being the opposite of that. I was always the reliable one, the predictable one, the one who gets things done. And now I was the absent one. Even though I had been present my whole life. A few days before the wedding, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't pure sadness, it was something heavier, a mixture of grief and disbelief. I realized that this event was about to happen, and I wouldn't be there, not by choice, but by imposition. And then, for the first time, I thought about doing something I had avoided until then. I thought about going there, not as a guest, but as a brother. Going to her house, looking into her eyes, demanding an explanation. But this idea didn't last long, because along with it came a question that paralyzed me. What if she confirms everything that the silence is already saying? I don't know how to explain it, but there's a kind of pain that we can endure while it's abstract, while it's still uncertain, while there's still a maybe. But when someone puts pain into words, it becomes definitive, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. So I did what proud people do when they're hurt. I retreated. I decided I wouldn't beg for a place where I wasn't wanted. The wedding day arrived. I woke up early that day, not out of anxiety, but because the body knows when something important is happening. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, imagining where she would be at that exact moment. Maybe nervous, maybe smiling, maybe thinking about everything but myself. And that hurt more than I'd like to admit. I spent the day at home. No social media, no conversations. Each passing hour was like a silent countdown. I knew exactly when she would be walking in, when you would be saying yes. At what point would everyone be applauding? And I was there, alone. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because I wasn't allowed. And that changes everything. Because there's a huge difference between not going and not being invited. When night fell, I felt a strange emptiness, as if something had been ended without warning. There was no goodbye. There was no confrontation. Just a door closing that I heard from afar. That night, I understood something fundamental. No matter how much you love someone, if that person decides to exclude you, there's no presence in the past sufficient to guarantee you a place in the present. And it was there, that day, in that absolute silence, that I realized my relationship with my sister had crossed an invisible boundary. After that, nothing would ever be the same again. And I didn't know it yet, but the worst was yet to come. The day after the wedding dawned, too ordinary. And that's what bothered me the most. The world didn't stop. The sun rose just the same. People went on with their routines. But inside me, something had broken. Silently. I woke up with that strange feeling you get when you dream something very real. And it takes a few seconds to remember that it actually happened. For a moment, still lying there, I thought, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it wasn't that serious after all. Maybe it was just an event. But as soon as I picked up my phone, reality came crashing back down. Social media was full. Photos, videos, rehearsed smiles, emotional declarations. My sister looked beautiful. It was impossible to deny that. And I felt something contradictory inside me. A part of me was happy for her, truly. But another part felt a deep, almost physical pain. Because each photo was a public confirmation of something I already knew privately. I wasn't there. And nobody seemed to miss me. I scrolled slowly. I saw relatives, friends, people I'd known forever. All present, people I'd helped, people with whom I'd shared important moments. All there. Except me. And the cruelest part wasn't the absence of my face in the photos. It was the absence of any questions. Nobody commented. "Where's your brother? Wow, that's strange, he's not here." Nothing. It was as if my absence was perfectly acceptable. I closed the app, but it didn't help. The messages started arriving. Not messages of consolation, nor of explanation. Messages of curiosity. "You couldn't go? I looked for you there. Is everything all right between you two?" And each of those questions was like reopening a wound I was trying to close, because I didn't know what to answer. Telling the truth exposed me. Lying diminished me. So I did what I always did when I didn't know how to react. I minimized it. It was her decision. I preferred not to go. Everything is fine. Lies. Nothing was fine. But I said that because admitting the truth would require facing something I hadn't yet digested. I had been rejected by someone I never rejected. And that stirs up deep things. It affected my sense of worth, my identity. Because suddenly I no longer knew who I was within that family. I had always been the brother, the steady one, the support. And now I wasn't even remembered. I started to distance myself, not dramatically, no announcements. I just started responding less, showing up less. It was a silent distancing, almost automatic, as if my body was protecting itself before my mind understood. I avoided family gatherings. I invented appointments, not because I was angry at people, but because every meeting was a reminder. Every conversation risked touching on that subject, and I didn't want to have to explain my pain to those who hadn't experienced it. As the days passed, something curious happened. The sadness began to transform into something else. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. Exhaustion from trying to understand. Exhaustion from justifying the unjustifiable. Tired of loving someone who clearly wasn't willing to include me. And that led me to an internal, silent, but important decision. I stopped trying. I stopped waiting for messages. I stopped imagining future conversations. I stopped rehearsing excuses I should never have to give. I accepted, with pain, but I accepted that exclusion had been a choice. And choices have consequences, even when they come from someone we love. I remember one specific night. I was sitting on the sofa, the house silent, and I realized that it had been days since I'd thought of her with hope, only with memories. And that's a dangerous sign, because when someone leaves the realm of hope, they begin to leave your life. I still thought about my sister. I still cared. But something had changed in the way I did. I no longer prioritized myself for her. And that hurts. But it also eases, because waiting hurts more than accepting. At that moment, I believed that would be the end of the story, that we would lead parallel lives, that time would do the rest. I had no idea that separation wasn't the end. It was just an interval, because when I finally started to rebuild myself without her, it was exactly at that point that she decided to come back. Time passed, not dramatically, not with grand events. It passed in the cruelest way possible, in silence. The days accumulated without news, no messages, no meetings. And little by little, what once hurt began to settle down. Not because it had stopped hurting, but because the body learns to live with pain when it becomes constant. I went on with my life. Work, commitments, small daily responsibilities. Outwardly, everything seemed normal. Inwardly, I was adapting to the idea that my sister was now part of the past. And that's a strange thing to admit, because nobody grows up expecting to have to get over a sibling. We get over relationships, friendships, phases. But family, we learn to endure, not to lose. Even so, I began to reorganize my life without her presence. Not on purpose, not as punishment, but because there was no choice. I stopped sharing details of my day. I stopped imagining what she would think about certain decisions. She ceased to be a point of reference. And that, however sad it may be, is a kind of liberation. I no longer woke up expecting a response. I didn't pick up my phone with that automatic expectation. Her name became distant, like an object stored at the bottom of a drawer. You know it's there, but you don't touch it. Some people noticed, my mother especially. She would comment from time to time, "You two are very distant." I would reply with a short smile. It's a phase. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a phase, it was a new configuration. And there was something curious about all of this. The more I distanced myself emotionally, the more I felt I was reclaiming something of myself. I started sleeping better again. I started focusing on things I had neglected, not because the pain had gone away, but because it had lost its grip on me. I no longer lived in a silence that wasn't mine, and it was during this period that I began to reflect more clearly. Without the immediate weight of rejection, some truths began to emerge. I realized that for many years, I had occupied a specific role in my sister's life: the safe haven, the problem solver, the one who was always available. And perhaps, just perhaps, when she decided to start a new life, that role became a nuisance. Because people who want to reinvent themselves sometimes need to distance themselves from those who remind them of who they were. This idea didn't bring me anger. It brought a mature sadness. That sadness that doesn't ask for revenge nor confrontation, only understanding. Even so, there was an open wound. Because understanding doesn't erase the fact that I was excluded. I had only learned to live with it. Months passed. The wedding was no longer an issue, the photos stopped appearing. Life went on, and I sincerely believed that that chapter had closed, that our story, as close siblings, was behind us. I was wrong, because it was on a random afternoon, one of those completely ordinary ones, that my cell phone vibrated. A simple notification, no fanfare, no preparation. I looked at the screen almost reflexively, and I saw her name. The same name I had learned not to expect anymore. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, or worse, that it was something trivial. But there was something different. The message had no emojis, no affection. It was short, direct. "We need to talk, it's important." I stared at that sentence for too long. My first impulse was to ignore it, not out of revenge, but out of self-protection, because I felt, that that message wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't an "I missed you." It wasn't an "I'm sorry." It was something else, something serious, something heavy, something you only seek when there's no one else to turn to. And it was at that moment that I understood something disturbing. After excluding me from the most important day of her life, my sister was only looking for me now, because she needed me. And that realization made my stomach churn, because I knew with an unsettling clarity that this conversation would present me with a choice I hadn't asked for, a choice I didn't want, but that, somehow, only I could make. I took a while to reply, not because I hadn't read the message, but because I needed to decide if I was ready to hear whatever came next. There are conversations you feel in your body even before they happen. This was one of them. I replied briefly. "When?" She replied too quickly, as if she had been expecting it. "Today, if you can." That confirmed everything I already suspected. It wasn't longing. It wasn't reconciliation. It was urgency. We arranged to meet in a neutral place, nothing near home, no family nearby. A simple cafe, the kind where nobody pays attention to anyone. I arrived first. I chose a table further away, near the window. Not strategically, but because I needed space to breathe. While I waited, I watched the people passing by on the street. Couples walking hurriedly. People laughing. People living. Everything seemed absurdly normal for a day that, for me, carried enormous weight. When I saw her enter, I recognized her instantly. But something was different. She seemed more tired, not just physically, emotionally. The smile she wore in public wasn't there. It was another version of her, more restrained, more tense. She saw me and hesitated for a second before coming to the table. That second said more than any words. She sat down across from me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. It was strange to look at someone who had been a part of your whole life and feel that there was an unknown territory between you. She fidgeted with her hands. She avoided my gaze. I waited, because after everything, I felt that conversation needed to start with her. She took a deep breath. "I know you were hurt." That was the first sentence. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a belated realization. I didn't respond, not out of coldness, but because I didn't trust my own voice at that moment. She continued, "I didn't know how to handle some things, and I ended up making the wrong choices." Choices. The word hung between us. I thought about everything that word carried, deciding to exclude someone, deciding not to explain, deciding to move on as if nothing had happened. She raised her eyes and finally looked at me, and that's when I saw something I didn't expect to see. Fear. Not guilt, not regret, of course, fear. And that made me wary. Because people who are afraid don't seek conversation. They seek an escape. She reached for her coffee cup but didn't drink. "I wouldn't have contacted you if it wasn't truly necessary." That sentence hit me like a weight, because in a way it confirmed everything I'd been trying to deny. I wasn't an emotional priority. I was the last resort. I took a deep breath before speaking. "Then why did you call me?" She swallowed hard. She looked around, as if afraid of being heard, and answered in a lower tone, "Because I need you. Not I miss you. Not I wronged you. I need you." The phrase sounded familiar. She used to say that when she was lost, when she needed support, when she trusted me. But now it was different. There was a hidden weight there, an unspoken request. I leaned slightly forward. "What do you need me for?" She hesitated before answering, and that silence was the most charged of all, because then I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. She hadn't called me to talk. She had called me to ask for something big enough to justify months of silence, something serious enough to pierce her pride. And whatever it was, it had a direct connection to the wedding, to that day I was excluded from. She took another deep breath, and before speaking, she said something that made me freeze inside. "Before I tell you, I need you to promise you'll listen to me until the end." That sentence put me on full alert, because requests that start like that are never simple. I remained silent for a few seconds. I looked at her, to that person I'd known since childhood, but who now seemed to carry a secret too big, and I realized that from that moment on there was no turning back. I could get up from the table, leave, but if I stayed, nothing would be the same. I nodded slowly. "Speak." And it was exactly there, in that instant, that I knew I was about to hear something that would completely change everything I thought about my sister, about the wedding, and about the real reason I'd been left out. She was silent for a few seconds after I said speak. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It was the kind of pause where a person organizes the chaos before letting it all out. She took a deep breath, rested her elbows on the table, and kept her eyes downcast. And then she said something I wasn't prepared to hear. My marriage started with a lie. In that instant, I felt my body react before my mind, a tightness in my chest, a chill running down my neck. Lie is too heavy a word to be thrown around like that, without context. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She continued, her voice too controlled for someone who was about to break down. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a momentary mistake. It was a decision. Decision. That word again. She explained that weeks before the wedding, something had happened, something that completely changed the foundation of it all. She discovered something that, if revealed, would destroy the perfect image she was building. Family, guests, expectations. Everything would crumble. I began to understand the weight of that conversation. She wasn't there to justify herself. She was there because she needed to share a burden that was becoming too heavy to carry alone. She looked up and stared at me again, and that's when she said, "The child I'm expecting isn't his." The world stopped. Not poetically, it truly stopped. I heard the words, but it took me a while to understand the meaning. My first impulse was to deny it internally, to hope she would say it was a joke, that she had expressed herself poorly. But she said nothing more. She just stood there, waiting for my reaction. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at her, trying to find any sign of exaggeration. There wasn't one. She was pregnant, married, and the child wasn't the man she had married in front of everyone. My mind silently collapsed, and suddenly, everything started to make sense. The exclusion, the estrangement, the silence. I hadn't been left out by chance. I had been pushed away, and because I knew too much, because she knew that if anyone noticed something wrong, that someone would be me. I took a deep breath, trying to control my voice. "And what does that have to do with me?" She hesitated to answer, and when she did, I felt the weight of the request even before understanding its magnitude. "I need you to be the father of this child." On paper, the sentence fell between us like something irreversible. She explained. Her husband suspected something. The family would be suspicious, but if there was a plan, something solid, the story could hold up. She needed someone trustworthy, someone who wouldn't fail, someone willing to take on a lie to protect her, and that someone, it was me. The brother she excluded from the wedding, the brother she pushed away to avoid suspicion, the brother she now needed more than ever. I felt a mix of emotions impossible to organize: anger, sadness, disbelief, but above all, a moral shock. She wasn't asking me for ordinary help. She was asking me to take on a lie that would change my life. "You want me to tell the world this child is mine? That I carry a story that isn't mine? That I become an accomplice to something I never chose?" She started to cry. Not an uncontrolled cry, a restrained cry. The kind of cry someone holds back for too long. "I have no one left," she said. "If this comes out now, I lose everything." And that's when I realized the cruelest irony of all. She excluded me to protect the lie, and now she was calling me to support her. I looked at the woman sitting in front of me, my sister, the same person who once shared toys with me, who cried on my bedroom floor, who trusted me without fear, and now she was asking me for something that went far beyond forgiveness or reconciliation. She was asking me to sacrifice my truth, to save hers, and at that moment a question began to echo inside me, louder than any other. How far does love for someone go, when that love demands that you lose yourself in the process? I knew with frightening clarity that any answer I gave at that moment would change everything, not just between the two of us, but inside me. After she finished speaking, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was a heavy silence, dense, full of unspoken things that had now been said too much. I kept looking at her, but at the same time, it felt like I was looking inside myself. Because at that moment, two versions of me began to compete for space. The first was the brother who always protected, who always showed up when called, who always put family above any personal discomfort. That part of me looked at her and thought, she's desperate. She made a mistake, but she's scared. If I don't help, she'll sink. But the other part was something I had ignored for years. It was the man who also had a life, a reputation, his own story, the man who never asked to be put in that position. And that part screamed silently, "This isn't fair. This isn't love. This is emotional abuse." I ran a hand over my face, trying to organize my thoughts. "Do you understand what you're asking of me?" I asked. She nodded, but that nod didn't convince me. Because intellectually understanding isn't the same as bearing the consequences. You're asking me to live a lie, to look people in the eye and uphold something that isn't true, to change who I am, to protect choices I didn't make. She was crying harder now. I know, she said, but I wouldn't have sought you out if there had been another way out. That sentence hurt more than any accusation, because it made it clear that I wasn't the first option. I was the only one left. And that brought me face to face with an uncomfortable question. If I said yes, I would be helping my sister, but I would be betraying myself. If I said no, I would be preserving my truth, but perhaps destroying her life. And it's cruel when life puts you in front of choices where every option hurts someone. I got up from my chair for a moment. I went to the cafe window. I needed air. I looked outside and saw people passing by, oblivious to it all. No one there knew that, just a few meters away, a man was being asked to erase his own identity in the name of his family. I thought about everything that would come next. Repeated lies, suspicious glances, poorly constructed explanations. I thought about birthdays, family gatherings, photos. I thought about the weight of carrying something that can't be shared. Because secrets like that, they don't sleep. They wake up with you, they sit at the table with you, they accompany you in silence. I went back to the table. She looked at me as if waiting for a verdict. I can't answer you now, I said. My voice came out firm, but inside I was in ruins. I need to think. I need a night. Maybe more. She nodded quickly. I hope so. But the way she said it, it showed that time wasn't on her side. Before we left, she said something that echoed inside me for days. You've always been the strongest person I've ever known. And that hit me in a strange way, because at that moment I didn't feel strong. I felt used, confused, divided. We said goodbye without a hug, without affection. Each went to a different side of the street, and as I walked, I felt the weight of the decision grow with each step. I knew that night would be long, that I wouldn't sleep, that I would talk to myself in a way I had never talked to myself before. Because that choice wasn't just about helping or not helping, it was about who I was willing to be. After that, and as I walked, a question began to form more clearly than any other. To what extent does helping someone you love cease to be love and become self-destruction? I didn't sleep that night, but it wasn't ordinary insomnia. It was a vigil. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, reliving every word of that conversation, every look from her, every heavy silence. And the more I thought, the clearer it became. I finally understood why it was bothering me so much. It wasn't just the request. It was the way it was done. She hadn't contacted me as a brother. She had contacted me as a tool. And accepting that would mean confirming something dangerous, that I would always be available to fix choices that weren't mine. The next morning I replied to her message. I wasn't cold. I wasn't distant. I was controlled. I thought, we need to talk again. She replied almost immediately. Thank you. I knew you would understand. That sentence, it carried a certainty that wasn't mine. But I let it go. I didn't correct it. I didn't confront her. Because sometimes the truth needs time to be told at the right moment. We arranged to meet again, this time at her house. The same place where so many decisions had been made without me. When I arrived, she seemed different, lighter, as if the weight had been transferred to me. She talked more, explained details, created scenarios. Who would know? Who wouldn't know? How the story would be told. I listened to everything in silence, and the more she spoke, the more evident the size of the lie being constructed became. She handed me a piece of paper with some notes, dates, stories, versions, a script. I held that paper for a few seconds, and then I looked up. Have you told him this yet? I asked. She froze. No, not now. I nodded. So you don't want help. You want cover. She tried to argue, said it was temporary, that everything would work out later, that nobody would get hurt. And that's when I realized something definitive. She really believed it. The lie had already become truth within her. I took a deep breath and said in a calm tone, perhaps calmer than she expected, I'm not going to do that. She looked at me, confused. What? I repeated. I'm not going to take on this lie. I'm not going to say this child is mine. I'm not going to support a story that isn't true. Her face changed, first confusion, then disbelief, then fear. But you said we needed to talk again. Yes, I replied. So I could tell you this looking into your eyes. She started to cry, but it wasn't that restrained crying anymore, it was despair. You promised you'd think about it. You let me believe. And it was at that moment that I said the hardest phrase of my entire life. I thought about it. And thinking was exactly what made me say no. I handed the paper back to her. This isn't a plan. It's an escape. And you're asking me to run away with you. She tried to convince me again. She talked about family. She talked about consequences. She talked about shame. And then I said something that completely changed the course of the conversation. You excluded me from your wedding because you knew I wouldn't sustain this lie. And now you call me because you realized you can't sustain it alone. She fell silent, and in that silence everything was said. I continued, my voice firm but not aggressive. I love you. I won't lie for you. Not even for love. Not even for fear. She tried to say I was destroying everything, and I replied calmly, no. All of this has already started destroyed. I'm just refusing to be the cement of a rotten structure. I stood up. Before leaving, I said the last thing that needed to be said. If you want help telling the truth, I'll be here. If you want help facing the consequences, also. But if you want someone to lie for you, you chose the wrong person. She didn't answer. I left, and for the first time since it all began, I felt something different. Not complete relief, not victory, but integrity. I had lost a lot in that process, but I hadn't lost myself. After that day, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as at the beginning. Before, it hurt because I didn't understand. Now it hurt because I understood too much. I didn't leave that house with a sense of victory. Whoever wins a situation like that loses something along the way. I lost the version of my sister that I thought I knew, and perhaps she lost the only person who would be by her side, even when the truth hurt. The following days were strange. There were no long messages. There were no public confrontations. Nothing exploded, at least not on the surface. But I felt something was moving underneath, like a silent crack that grows before everything collapses. My mother called a few times. She talked about trivial things, the weather, the routine. I avoided the subject, not because I was afraid, but because I knew that when it came, it wouldn't come in the form of light conversation. It would come in the form of consequence. I went on with my life. I returned to my routine, work, silences, but there was something different inside me. I no longer felt guilt. Sadness, yes. Longing, sometimes, but not guilt. Because for the first time, I understood a hard truth that no one teaches. Loving someone doesn't obligate you to disappear for that person. Family isn't a contract of eternal self-sacrifice. And saying no, when everything in you has been trained to say yes, is an act of silent courage. A few weeks later, I learned that she told a different version of the story. A version in which I was distant, cold, inflexible. I didn't correct her, because whoever needs to destroy another to sustain a lie is already lost enough. What struck me most wasn't that. It was realizing that even after everything, she still hadn't told the truth. Not to her husband, not to her family. She chose to continue sustaining something that can't sustain itself. And that left me with a strange feeling, not of relief but of waiting, as if the story wasn't over yet, because secrets like that don't age well. They accrue interest. I often wondered if I did the right thing, and every time that doubt arose, I returned to the same image, me looking in the mirror, knowing I still recognized myself. And that's priceless. Today, I don't know exactly what we are. We're not close. We're not enemies. We are two people connected by a past. and separated by a truth that has yet to be told. And perhaps that is the most unsettling point of all. Because I know something that no one else knows, and I know that time is not on her side. So when people ask me if I regret it, I answer honestly, no. But I also know that that story didn't end that day. It just entered a countdown. And when the truth finally comes to light, because it always does, the question won't be whether I made the right choice. The question will be, who will be prepared to pay the price when everything that was built on silence finally crumbles? And when that day comes, perhaps this story needs to be told again, from the point where everything truly fell apart. Because there's a part of this story that hasn't happened yet, and when it does, no one will come out unscathed.